Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Max. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Ulysses. We are making a writing software. We're going to talk about it in a moment. And today I'm going to talk about our application design process, how we get from an initial idea through all the steps in between to the finished feature. But let me start first by introducing my team. These are the 18 fine folks, including me, and the 3 for which I don't have a photo yet. That was due to Corona. Nobody here, nobody taking a photo. And you can see there's a question mark, which implies that we might have a vacancy. And we won an Apple Design Award in 2016 for our app, so that's what I'm going to talk about today is our process in designing the application interface that ultimately led to this award. At least that's how I believe we got it. Right. So this is the application. I'm not going to delve too much into it. I'm just going to give you a rough idea of how it's built. So that when we talk about a few features, I'm going to show a few examples throughout the course of the talk. I can, you know roughly what it's about. So what you can see, it's a 3-pane layout. Basically what you have, a writing app where you write your text, and your text lives inside sheets, which you can imagine as sheets of paper. And then those sheets live inside groups, which are inside your library. So what we have is an organizational structure for writing texts, and the application then allows you to do a lot of different things with it. For example, it syncs between all your devices. You can export it to multiple formats, whatever you want. So it's a very, very feature-complete productivity application, but that's just a rough idea that we need to get going. And given that maybe not everybody is in the same field as us, I'm just going to have a quick heads up on terminology. I'm going to be talking about features today. I'm going to say functions, and I'm probably mentioning projects. For the matter of this talk, they're all the same. So a feature is a function, is a project is a feature, is a function. So just one thing, I'm just going to use those words intermixed to make it more interesting, maybe. All right. So just to give you an idea what I mean by what is a feature in an app, here's one example. I just mentioned we have those sheets where text lives inside. And then you can have groups where there's a lot of sheets inside the group and they make up a project, a writing project. And in the latest release, Ulysses 20, we introduced a feature called material sheets, which means that you can take some text you have or a sheet that you have, a piece of text, and mark it as material, which makes it non-relevant for the final marks it as non-relevant for the final export. Which then means that whenever you export your project, it's not going to get included. Whenever you count statistics on your project, it's not going to get included. And this kind of feature, this is the kind of feature that I'm talking about. So adding a function, the material sheet, not the sheet feature itself, but just the material sheet is one feature that we're talking about. And you can imagine it sounds easy getting this going, but then you need to think about how does it behave when I export just the material sheet. How does it behave in a lot of edge cases? How does it sync over to other devices? How does it work together with other applications, and so on and so forth? So there's a lot of aspects to consider for every feature. And material sheets is just one example I wanted to give you. Right. When we design a feature like that, the first question that you might ask is, what is it all about? So what is the core of designing any interface, any function inside the application? And for us, it's the objectives. So what are the objectives that we want to achieve, and what has the team? What does the team want to do with the feature? And there are many different kinds of objectives that you can have. For us, it's really just one single objective for everything we do inside the app. It's just one, and that is excellent usability. There's a lot of different things that you can do. I already said that. You can do something like you want to improve the return of investment, or you want to have a better conversion rate, or you want to share your brand. None of those objectives are ours. We just want to have the best possible usability, and everything that we do, at least inside the app, and at least theoretically, I mean, there's always deviations, but everything that we do draws from that single objective. Okay, usability is a very broad term, and I just want to, from the outset, make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And I'm not going to talk about the application usability or any of those big topics. I just want to focus on features today, so functions, as I mentioned before, or projects, the same word. And what we think a feature must have, or the traits a feature must have to be a good feature, to be a well-designed feature, to be a feature of excellent usability. So the first thing is, a feature needs to be simple. You all know the sentence, perfection is only achieved when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And that is very true. So the feature should be as minimal as possible. Do we need all those extras? Well, depends on the other aspects that we have, but given the other things that I'm going to name in a few moments, simplicity means that we cannot leave anything away without compromising on the other aspects. How simple can we go? A feature needs to be adaptive. It needs to support the use cases of the users and maybe even the edge cases. So not every usage is the same, not every user is the same, not every use case is the same, and a great feature can adapt to a lot of different situations. Take the material sheets. You can use that to organize your project. You can use that to have it as true material, but you can also use that to save backup copies of old versions, for example. So this feature can be used in many different ways. Although it's maybe thought for one use case specifically, it can be used for many different use cases. A great feature needs to be discoverable. So whenever you have, as a user, whenever you have the feeling, there's something that I could need, that now I'm in a situation where I would need to do X, Y, Z, and then you find it exactly in the place where you were looking for it, then it's a good feature. So you discover it in wherever, whenever you need it. But on the other side, it also needs to be unobtrusive. So it needs to make sure it's not getting in your way all the time. It's not, you may remember a little Clippy from Word that came in and said, hey, you want to write a letter? That's a very obtrusive feature. The letter assistant from Word, I don't know what it was, 97. A good feature needs to be unobtrusive. It needs to stay out of your way until you need it. And when you need it, it should be right there. So that's the two. Discoverability and unobtrusiveness are the two that play like in a tandem. Just like simple and adaptive, right? Something that is extremely simple might be hard to be very adaptive. And you need to find the balance. A great feature with a great usability needs to be well integrated. It needs to work together with all the other features. It cannot just live on its own. So Ulysses is a very, very big application with a lot of features, and you can imagine that a lot of features interact with each other. I'm going to have another example where we're going to talk about it a bit more in a moment. And it needs to integrate with everything else that we've built. Everything else needs to be simple and adaptive and discoverable and unobtrusive, but then they all together need to be integrated. And last but not least, maybe that's a special priority or special concern for us, but might be for you as well, is the feature needs to feel OS native. So it needs to feel right at home at the operating system, whether you're on an iPad or an iPhone or on a Mac, it needs to feel like it's always been there. It's been designed with the OS together. It needs to match the expectations that users have at the interface. For example, can I drag and drop something? Can I touch it with my pencil? Can I use my finger to do this and that kind of interaction that I would normally expect from other applications? A good feature would need to fulfill all those expectations as well. And all that together also includes one point that I didn't mention here is user expectations. I mean, the user maybe already uses your app and you introduce a new feature, then they come with certain expectations, or they have expectations from the outside. They know a similar feature from other places, and they come inside your app and look at your feature, and then they have expectations, and you want to fulfill those expectations. You don't want to break what users have learned over the years. So here's a different feature that I'd like to show, where we can talk about those points. You can see there's some text, and it's maybe a bit difficult to see, but there's a light gray area here in the middle, and that's a code block. So you don't have to understand the application code in there, but what you need to understand is some of our users are technical writers, and technical writers typically or often enough write prose, text, descriptions, and include code snippets in between. And when we shipped the code block feature a while back, we had to go through all those criteria for the feature and see if it fulfilled those. I don't want to go too much into how simple it is, because maybe that's up to judgment, but we can say it's very adaptive. For example, you can set a programming language, and we started out with 40 programming languages support. You want to talk about meeting user expectations. Well, whenever you include a code snippet, you would want to have syntax highlighting. You maybe can see that there's some text is red, and some is blue, and some is more purplish. This is just something users will come to expect when they look at your feature. Oh, Ulysses adds a code block feature. Well, I will expect it to do syntax highlighting. And then it needs to integrate with everything else. Of course, we could just add code blocks to the editor. You can write great code blocks, but if you can't export them, if it does not support importing it from other applications, you're lost. It's a helpless feature. So it needs to integrate with all those things. And it needs to support a lot of edge cases. So for example, when you now import a code block from a different application, it might happen that the user has set a programming language that is different from the ones that we know. We still need to support it. We can't just delete it. That would kill the expectation and would not be a good integration with others. So there's a lot of aspects that we need to think about. And just one more example, when exporting to HTML as a web page, for example, to upload it as a documentation site, there's a common standard for how those code highlighting color schemes are set up. And those code highlighting color schemes use a very specific way of naming things, and we needed to adapt to that. So we needed to make sure that our export matches the expectations from the outside world. All right, so that is one feature. Right, so and then now you may be asked, yeah, well, those are features, yeah, nice aspects, everything nice together, but how do you get there? And I'm going to talk the rest of the talk. I'm going to talk about our design process. How do we get from the idea to the finished feature, fulfilling all those criteria? And it's important to know that we didn't set out there. It's an evolving process. We're changing it all over the time. And I'm going to show you just a simplified version, because if I added all those connections and circles where we turn around and maybe do things differently, that would be a very, very messy graph. So here's a very simplified version. It's a 6-step process. We start on the left and we end on the right. And every single feature goes through those 6 steps, basically. Sometimes we leave one out, sometimes we have one extra. Well, we never have one extra, but sometimes we leave some out. So the first thing we start with is the idea, of course. We're going to talk about those in a moment. Every single step we're going to talk about. But we start with an idea. And ideas are cheap. I mean, you can always have ideas. A lot of people had a lot of ideas, but those are very unripe. So you need to think about them. You need to look at reference material. You need to look at those expectations that we just talked about to understand the idea and what it would mean and how we would realize it inside the application. This is the process we call ripening. So you take the idea, you pitch it to other colleagues, you talk about it, you do, we're going to talk about it in a moment. You could do a few sketches, and once you have a ripe idea, then we commit to building the feature. So only when the idea is at a certain stage, we say, well, right now we're going to build this feature. Then, of course, we're going to build it, very obvious. And once we've built it, we put it out for testing. And testing means we show it to users, we get feedback, and that involves the development, and it maybe creates new ideas and so on. We're going to go into a moment. But once we've done the testing and have the feature refined, we're going to ship it. And afterwards, there's going to be another phase of refinement. After the feature is finished around here, we're going to have even more refinement where we, in subsequent releases of the application, make more changes to the feature to get it right up with all the expectations that we had. All right. We're going to go through that now step by step. And of course, we start with the idea or the inception of a feature. Obviously, where do we take those from? Obviously, with an existing product out there, we get a lot of user feedback. Well, we got a lot of emails every single day. We get dozens of emails asking us, hey, can you please add blah, blah, blah? Can you add this and that? I need you to change this into that. So we have a lot of feedback from users that we need to funnel and think about, but we get a lot of requests for new features inside the app. So there's one way where ideas come from. Then, of course, we have our long-term goals inside the app. For example, before we had an iPhone version, we always wanted to make an iPhone version. So we would work towards that goal of having an iPhone version. And I don't know if we would call it a feature to get an iPhone version initially done. Probably not. But working towards that goal, that long-term goal, is one way we can have ideas and feature. And then, of course, we have wishes of team members, right? People inside our company work with the app. The developers, of course, work with the app. Everybody in this team works with the app day in and day out. And of course, they also have wishes. I would put them separately from user requests. Strictly speaking, team members are users as well. But team members have a different perspective. They have a more broad perspective usually. Seeing a lot of, having contact with a lot of users or having built a lot of different features that a user normally wouldn't use at the same time, team members have a great perspective. And from all of that, the first and most important step is to extract the problems and the needs. You can't go and build a feature with a solution. You need always to retract and go back to understand the problem. Of course, and we don't always commit to our whole long-term goals and say, now we're going to build our long-term goal. Most of the time, we usually just do a step towards the user requests, a step towards the team goals. We try to find the smallest thing that we can build to go in that direction. But let me get back to extracting problems and needs. There's this saying, I don't know who said it. I say it all the time. It's users are always right about their problems, but only rarely with their proposed solutions. So what that shines through is when someone comes at you and say, hey, I'm using your app and this and that I don't get, their problem is always right. They have a problem, and then they come and suggest a solution. Maybe you should add a red-blue button up here, and blue button up there. And you're saying, well, the red and blue button is very weird. You're wrong. Well, you're partially wrong. The solution you're proposing probably is wrong, but the problem you're having, you're not finding something, you're confused about how we did it. There's a lack in functionality that we need to a gap that we need to fill. The problem is always right. I can't argue with you about your problems. Your problems are real and they are your problems. But the solution you propose when you come at me, we need to talk about that. So, right. And then with regard to the iteration, here's a feature that we shipped in one version. In Ulysses, you can have those sheets and you can give keywords to the sheets to categorize them. And in one version, we shipped a manager for those keywords, which was a very simple UI, which would show you all your keywords. You could set colors and you would have buttons down here. And later on, we realized, well, that was too simple. We needed to extend it. We got feedback from users and we iterated on the feature. And then only shortly later, we turned it into that. So this is going step by step. So it's still the same keywords, it's still the same management UI, but now you got a feature called favorites and get a few more actions and the buttons are rearranged to make it more clear. So this is the iterative process that we take at features. Not everything needs to be built in its whole from the outset. All right, so that is where we get ideas and how we select ideas. And then we get to the ripening process. Where we answer all those open questions. If you take an experienced developer and pitch an idea, hey, let's do this and that, they always come with oh, and this is going to be difficult. And I know, we've talked about that, you know that we are not going to do that. So there's a lot of open questions you need to talk about. You definitely need to draw sketches. And you need to ping pong those sketches with the designer and the implementation and maybe show it to the original requester if it's inside a team, of course, only. And then you need to outline the functionality. So what should it do? What should it aim for? What do we want to, what are the exact things we want to achieve with the feature? Not the rough idea, okay, let's build a great feature, but like, where's the boundary? And only recently, we've always done those steps, but we've done them very informally. And only recently, we've adopted a new process that we call write a pitch, which means you take all those things and put them into a document where you need to write it all down. And those documents have a very, very clear structure. And I can only recommend you to do that. And I'm going to show you how they work in a moment. All right. So a project pitch. Project pitch could also be called a project plan, project idea, project outline. Don't get too deep down on the word. But basically the idea of a pitch is that it's one document that you can show to someone and ask for am I allowed to build this? Do I get the time allocated to build this? So it's maybe it's a pitch of the engineering to the management, but we don't have the structure, so it doesn't really make sense to call it a pitch. It's more project outline, but yeah, don't get too much down on the word. The first thing you need to make clear in a pitch is the problem. And now I'm going to show you this outline. And what's really, really important is every section needs to stand on its own. So if you write a pitch, you need to formalize the problem. You need to write down what do we need a solution for. You don't write what the solution is going to look like. You're not going to write how willing you are to take it, to tackle it, or how much time it's going to cost. You just write down the problem. And someone reading through the document must be able to just read the problem and understand the problem. So the problem must stand on its own. A problem, I mean, there's a lot of problems out there, and not every problem is addressed. So there must be some problems that you're willing to address and some that you're not. And in some processes, that's a coincidence what gets selected to do and what not, but you can also make it a conscious decision. But that means there are some problems you're not going to tackle and some problems you're going to tackle. So that is the problem. Every problem can stand on its own, and the description that you have in your project pitch needs to stand on its own. And once you have the problem, you need to write down, why are you going to solve that problem? Why should we care about this? I mean, there is a problem when you're entering Tibetan text in Chinese text in whatever, and if I add 3 dots in a row, then something bad happens. Well, that is a problem, sure, but nobody cares about this problem, maybe. So why should we care about it? Why is it an important problem to solve? Why do we need a keyword manager? Why do we need material sheets? Give me the reason. And then once you have given me the reason, give me the time. How much is this solution worth to you? I mean, we don't have a solution yet, but given just the problem and just why you want to do it, how much time should we allocate for it? Is it something that we should spend a year on? Is it something that we, if it's quickly solved, we can solve it, of course, but never more than a month? Is it something that should just take a week? How much time are you willing to spend on that project? And only then you're allowed to talk about a solution. So all the first 3 points need to work without a solution. What's traditionally more common is, and especially I as a programmer know that, you always come with a solution. Hey, I have a great solution. We can do AI. But we don't have a problem. Well, then we construct a problem around our solution, and we're going to make our way around. But what you need to do instead is first have the problem and then come to the conclusion that, for example, AI is the right solution to it. So the solution is not, cannot be the main part of a project. It only follows from the problem. And the solution, of course, needs to describe how you're going to tackle the problem within the constrained time. You can't say, well, we need a new house, and we're going to give us 1 week, and then the solution is, let's build a skyscraper. That's not going to work. So you need to find a solution that fits the time limits and of course, solves the problem. You can't have a solution that doesn't solve the problem, for example. It needs to be one coherent document. So, and when we have the solution, what we always need to talk about as well is risks. Where are the challenges in the solution? What part of the solution don't we know yet? How much risk are we willing to take? What can't we foresee? And shouldn't we try to minimize this? Shouldn't we try to answer those questions first before we tackle the project? Is it a calculated risk? What can't we know? And finally, you should also always make sure that you talk about the don'ts. What are we not going to solve? What is not going to happen? What are things that are beyond the scope of this project? We're going to build a house. We're not going to build a city. We're not going to build a highway, and it's just a house. And what we don't know is we don't know how the underground of the house is, so we don't know if we need additional concrete or not. So that is a risk. But we're not going to build a highway. If you want to learn more about this entire process, this is very, very heavily inspired by the shape-up process of the Basecamp guys, basecamp.com/shapeup, if you want to read more. And here's an example of how such a pitch looks like. This is for the material sheets that I showed in the beginning that we only did recently. So this is where the problem lives. The appetite means why are we going to solve it and within what time frame. Then we talk about the solution. Not too specific, but not too rough. That's a tough thing to manage, but you usually have like those sketches that say where things go and how the flow works, but doesn't go too much into detail. And that's still all the solution, and maybe you have some bonus things to do, and in the end you talk about the risks and you talk about what you don't want to do. So for example, one thing that when we set out with the material sheets, which is just the parts of the text, to mark them as material, we came up with the question, maybe it would be a good idea to have entire groups that are material. So I just throw it in there, and everything in it is a material element, whatever is inside that group. But when we worked on the concept, we realized, well, that's very difficult, and maybe it's not even needed. So this is something we put in what we don't do. We will not build it for groups, for example. Yeah, difficulties with material groups, that is. Don't want to lie. All right. So when we have this pitch written up, ready to go, we commit. And that is an additional step, right? So getting from the idea to the pitch takes work. You need to think things through, you need to make sketches, you need to build an outline, you need to write all the documents, so that is one work. But then once you have it done, you have a big picture. And once you have the picture of the feature, you can always say, well, I think that's too much. We don't want to spend that much time on this little benefit. Or, yeah, it's great, but we can't do it right now because we need to do something else. So we make it a very conscious decision to commit on building a feature, because this means we need to allocate resources. And only recently we started setting ourselves limits of those resources. Okay, you can work on that feature, but only for 2 months. And if it takes longer, then we need to talk about it. It's not that you failed if you not finished it within 2 months, but if we get there, maybe the concept wasn't good enough, or we didn't talk about enough of the risks. So something must be wrong inside that feature pitch that didn't work out. So we need to commit on resources. We set ourselves limits. Resources for us means, of course, we need to devote team members. And one big benefit of this pitch and commitment thing, though, is also that the team members are devoted. It's a bit pun. But when you work on a concept and you work on all the details, you're very much committed to the feature already, right? You've thought it through and you think it's a good idea and you present it as a pitch, then you're already very involved and you're very willing to build. So this is also like this process of the preparation is to get everybody on board. And then one big benefit of you having the pitch thing is you can just use it as a project plan. You copy it over and say, well, now we're going to build it. You already have all the outline done. Nothing more to add is a bit of an exaggeration, but there's a lot of things already set up. And here we are with very clear objectives for the realizing team. There's a bonus to this commitment, which gets talked about, I think, a bit too little, and is something you always need to make clear to yourself again, is be aware of things not done. Whenever you commit to something, you're not committing to something else. Whenever you say, yeah, well, let's build this and that, you're not building that other thing. Resources are limited. Team capacity is limited. Whenever you do something, something else gets left behind. And by making it a conscious decision to commit team members for a certain time period to a certain project, they can't do something else. Which means the other projects that you wanted to do need to wait or have to be cancelled or are maybe not that important at all. Right. And once we've committed, of course, we do the development. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it, but what we do is we turn those mocks that we've done into final interfaces. Of course, those are still fed marker sketches. Not every word is perfect, not every location is perfect. And once you work out the feature, you realize maybe this checkbox is not needed after all. We need an additional option here and there. So it's mocks. and interfaces are something different. So there's a jump in between. Once you realize all the details of the feature that you're building, you realize all the implications, and then you know that you need to change many things that you thought were maybe clear before. And what you basically do is you challenge the pitch. You can work on the document. That's something we're not doing at the moment, but maybe we're going to do it in the future. For now, the document is the outset, and then we work on the feature to realize it. But what is important about this entire process is we're always asking us, is this thing we're building, is it fulfilling all our objectives? Is it a simple feature? So can we leave something out? Is it adaptive? Does it fulfill the need that we expect to come up? Is it discoverable? Does some other developer, while testing it, actually find the feature? Is it well integrated? Does it work together with all those other features? This is usually something you realize only very far down the road, that all the implications a feature has on all the other features. And the more features you have, the more complicated this part gets. And of course, we look at how native it feels. So we always check, at every stage, we check our interface and our feature against all those aspects. And then here's the important process: iterate, iterate, iterate. So we do a first take, we build it, we look at it, and we say, well, it's nice, but let's do it over again. And then we build another take, and we say, well, that's much better, but... And then we do another take. Just to give you an idea, here's one of my favorite interfaces in the entire app. It's just the writing interface. I mean, there is exactly one button up there. We call this feature the full screen mode, and it took us, I don't know, 10 versions maybe to get to this result. It looks so simple, I know. It may sound like a joke. Well, you done away everything, and you ended up with an interface with a single button. Wow, that's a big achievement. But of course, that's a static screenshot. So there's a lot of interactions going on, and modal interfaces that usually aren't modal, and all the things going on. But getting to this kind of full screen mode, we had to go through a lot of different full screen modes. And why we iterated in every single release, of course, but we also iterated over releases. So this full screen mode has evolved over at least 3 or 4 years through at least 5 or 6 major remakes until it ended up here. I don't know if that's the final version. Probably not, but it's a good intermediate step where you just have one little button left. All right, and once we have it implemented and in a state where we say, well, that's pretty cool, we run a beta test, which means we invite a few users to come and take a look at the feature. We then look at their feedback and try to incorporate it. But again, think about beta testers are also just users. They are right about the problems, but maybe not about the solutions. So what they say they want doesn't necessarily mean what they actually need. So think about that. Does it really have to be added right now, or can we leave that open for later? Is it such a big roadblock that we need to address it before shipping the initial version, or can we leave that to maybe the next version? But we do all those testing to catch true issues early. The earlier in the process you catch true problems, for example, a feature's really not sufficient for the things you want to solve with it, then it's better to catch those issues early than only very late. Because once you release it to all the users, you get the feedback from all the users. So if you get the feedback from a small group of users first, and you have a few big problems in there, you can solve them, and later on, when you get it to a bigger audience, you don't get that much feedback about this one problem because you've already solved it. And of course, we stabilize our solution, which is more a technical thing, but we need to really work out the wording. For getting the beta out, we need to finalize and nail down some aspects of a feature. And then we take the feedback that we get from our users to, again, validate against all the old criteria. Is it simple? Is it adaptive? Is it discoverable? Is it integrated? And is it native? Especially this discoverability is really something that really comes out only during a beta test. Because only when you have real users sitting in front of a new version of the app, do they find the feature? How do they like it? Do they understand it? Is it simple enough? Can they achieve everything they want to do with it? Does it fulfill their expectations? Does the code block have syntax highlighting? If they throw things at it, like they would usually, does it hold up? And then, of course, you ship. Because that's the other important part about getting things done, is actually shipping them to get even more feedback from the broader audience. So here's one of my favorite little features from last year, where we added a split view to the app. And we allowed users to work on two texts at the same time. We had an initial version going quite fast, but to get it right, to get all the interactions going, to meet the user's expectations and to make it feel right at home at the operating system on the iPad, we had to do a lot of work during the testing. And then last but not least, definitely not least, we go into the refinement, where we get the full real-world feedback. I mean, testers are always very usually, I have to say, testers are usually quite tech-savvy people that are always running on the newest OS, on the newest device, on the newest everything. They want to test everything out. So they're a special group among all users. And once you release it as a full version, all the users get it, and you get the feedback from all the users. So although the beta testers might not have a problem of understanding your feature and they find it really simple, not everybody else in your user base might agree. So this is why you need the real world feedback after you've shipped. And of course, everything you ship generates new ideas. Oh well, I've seen you have this cool, great code blocks feature. How about I can make your app into a code editor, which is completely different, not even one, but every feature you ship generates new ideas and more feedback. And this is where you refine. No? People come and ask for little things, you add them soon. People come and ask for big things, you put them on the roadmap, and you get entirely new ideas. And then it starts all over again, of course. I mean, we are here in the real world feedback. I mean, this is not truly the sixth step. Actually, we more or less stop after the fifth, but you get in the sixth step, you get the real world feedback, and you generate new ideas from that, and then you start all over again, and you build the next version of your features. And so, for example, for the feature I just showed you a moment ago, the split view, you might not realize this right away, but this is only a few months later when we adopted the OS-provided split view and we threw away our own feature. So we had this change of the outside world where we had our own split view, and now the operating system would ship another version of the split view, and we had to keys our own implementation and replace it with the one of the system. It looks very similar, well, that's the point, which was very reaffirming for us that our implementation was very similar to what Apple would come up with. And yeah. So, but this was when we had to refine and throw away a lot of work. But it was all worth it in between. So, here we are. Second last slide. You always made it. Great for having you around. Here's the key points to take away. Strive for excellent usability when you want to get the best possible features out. Really, really work on your design process. Make sure that you follow those steps and that you always consciously think about what you're doing. And last but not least, iterate, iterate, iterate. That's what it makes up. Oh, and by the way, we are hiring right now an iOS and macOS user interface designer. So basically, this is your job description. And I want to add, this is the first time ever that we have a position open like that. So send your resumes. Thank you very much.